All right, hey everybody, Riot Mort here. We did it. We're here. We are at Teamfight Tactics Festival of Beasts, the Set 4 Fates mid-set expansion. We are here to do the rundown of everything you're going to see on PBE, so this is going to be a long one. And joining me today is the lead designer of the set, Giovanni. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Giovanni. I'm the set lead for 4.5, was for 4 as well, and so excited to talk about what's coming to the PBE here very soon.
Sweet. So I think right away one of the things we should talk about is that this is a lot bigger than Galaxies, is it not?
Yeah, very true. About 50% bigger than what we did for the mid set for Galaxies. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. All right, so let's start off right away. Let's just get into it so we don't take too long. With the goodbyes. We're losing 21 champions here, 20 champions, if I can count, apparently. But the big change here is that it's a lot of the forecasts, right?
Yeah. So I think when we set up to do this mid set, one of the things we really wanted to target was forecast because it's what you build your composition around as you transition into late game. And we felt that some of the most value of a shakeup would occur there. But as we kind of tested, we were like, well, we might as well hit all these other ones pretty hard too. But definitely forecast focused.
Yeah. I think some of the other ones that I've surprised players so far is Dusk. Dusk was a pretty popular comp that I've seen a lot of people be like, why is that getting removed? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so sometimes when we do removals for a mid set, or even like as we transition to a new set, one of the things we focus on is like who wasn't quite working or never found their space. But at the same time, we also want to shake things up by removing things that are sort of cornerstones for people. And Dusk was a vertical that people played a lot and had a lot of flexibility. And so we thought it was a great thing to remove, not because it wasn't like great or it was problematic, but because people did just kind of gravitate to it throughout the entire course of 4.0 as we've been working
Yeah.
on it.
Cool. And then the last one is Moonlight. I think the secret here is actually that Moonlight was something we originally did not plan on removing. We had talked about swapping, what was it, Aphelios for Rise and Lysandra for Camille? Is that right?
Camille. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. We tried it out. It's one of those things that it worked out, okay, it was fine. But we got to a point in development where we really wanted more shakeup in the 1 and 2 cost area. And Moonlight was one of the best things to remove to really kind of get more back in that area without disrupting a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
In general, I'd say that set 4 is like very tightly interconnected, and removing 1 or 2 pieces here or there causes a lot of rippling effects. So just kind of ripping out Moonlight was just something that we needed to do at some point.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so that's enough for goodbyes. Let's start talking about new stuff. First up, sort of the premier trait, if you will, Dragonsoul. The way Dragonsoul works is the first ally to take damage gets a buff, and then every 5th attack after that, they fire a shot that deals 40%, 80%, 200% max health, as well as they gain some attack speed and spell power. Any comments here?
New tall vertical should be a lot of fun to play. Very, very well rounded. I think it'll be one of those compositions that players who are kind of coming back to TFT will gravitate towards and be able to just kind of pilot really easily, which is super cool. And it's really flashy. It's got a really nice visual effect associated with it that's quite fun to watch. So
Speaking of that, I'm going to pull that up on screen here so they can see that. But you can see here Olaf shooting the big old beam. Pretty cool. Passes to Tristana. Although you're kind of blocking Tristana. That's my fault. But yeah. So I think what's interesting about this trade is, like you said, it's really flashy, really cool to see whether it be like Shyvana or Olaf get this buff, things like that. But I also think this is one that a lot of players might struggle with just because it's like, you can't just throw it in and be like, surprise, it works. You kind of have to plan around who's going to get the buff, where that's going to end up, and who's going to utilize it properly. If it gets stuck on Braum for the whole game, for example, that can be pretty bad.
yeah.
So, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I suspect we might massage a little bit some things on the PBE with like how it necessarily like triggers.
Yeah.
Just because we've noticed in playtests that like sometimes if you position poorly, no one on your team will get Dragon Soul because like you're running 3 ranged
Oh,
Dragon
right.
Soul and they don't have any assassins.
Yeah.
So it's possible we might change that a little bit just to alleviate some of that because, like you said,
Yeah.
there's a lot of subtlety going on there that I think players might not catch up on right away. So. We'll see.
Yeah, I forgot about the playtests where, again, like 3 ranged Dragon Soul, none of them take damage, no one gets the buff. Those definitely feel a little awkward, and like you said.
Yeah.
And yeah, I should have called that out at the beginning here. This is what's going to PBE, but if you've played TFT at any set before, what ends up happening on PBE is we're usually changing things literally every day. up until launch. So expect a lot of changes from here, but this will be your warm-up to what's going to PBE. So, cool. All right, let's talk about the champions. So we've got Brand first, Dragonsoul Mage. The way I look at Brand, pretty standard, but kind of replaces the Nami, where it's like some damage, some CC. But the crazy thing I think a lot of people are going to deal with here is the fact that this spell can miss.
Yes, it can. I think one costs are one of the areas where we can do variants. We've seen this with sort of like Nidalee, Twisted Fate, like how much is he doing? Brand is very similar in that when he hits hard. He does a nice chunk of AoE damage and he stuns. But when he kind of whiffs, he might like hit like one unit or potentially none. That's kind of rare, but it's a potential. So we'll see how that ends up feeling. But definitely some variants here with Brand that you didn't get with Nami at all.
Yeah, like you said, if he hits a group of like 3 or 4, it's a lot of damage. So.
Oh yeah.
I've also seen Luden's Brand do really well because, like I said, you get the CC off the Luden's proc, kind of like Nami here, and he's got a 50 mana, so that's pretty good.
Absolutely.
The other thing to call out, by the way, is every Dragonsoul champ has higher base MR than normal. Sort of a throwback to our old dragon trait, if you will. So, not going to give him magic immunity or anything, but...
Yeah. Maybe a little powerful, so...
Yeah. All right, and then we have Tristana, the Dragonsoul Sharpshooter. 40 mana, kind of reminds me of Galaxy's Kog'Maw, actually, where it's like short mana and then rapid attack speed with extra damage. Does that sound about right?
Yep, absolutely. Definitely sort of a hybrid between Vayne, who's been removed from the set, and Kog'Maw, this sort of fast attacking, bonus damage dealing champion. Not true. But currently, when we go to PBE, the magic damage does not fall off with successive bounces, so you'll get that sort of Vayne sharpshooter feel from her while being more attack speed oriented.
Yep. Yeah, the other thing to call out here is, so you have Tristana, who has the attack speed buff, then is Dragonsoul, so if you can get the buff on her, her attack speed can get really nutty really quick. Makes her an excellent static shiv user, things like that. So I expect this. We've seen some like sharpshooter Dragonsoul comps with 3-star Tristana in our playtest, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's, for a 1-cost, she's been performing super well, and I think people have been really happy with just how versatile she is and how well she holds up in a late game, itemized and not itemized. And I do think that both her and Olaf are in a really good position to actually trigger the effect of Dragonsoul fairly frequently. So
nice. Cool. All right, on to the next one. Braum. So Braum is back, the premier frontliner, 750 HP, 60 armor, 60 MR, tanky boy for a 2-cost, and then puts up his shield, reducing damage taken by a lot. Any thoughts on Braum?
Very, very powerful frontliner. One of those units who can just honestly carry a frontline for a big chunk of the game, similar to how we've seen him in the past. Super cool. Great person to put all of your Dragon Claw, your Thornmail, your Sunfire on. So great tank overall.
I think there's a couple things to call out here. One is that we don't have the old Thornmail Warmogs back in the day. True. So you're not gonna get those invincible Brahms that carry your entire comp that you saw in like Rise of the Elements. But like you called out, he is super duper tanky.
Yeah.
The other thing though is you got to be careful that he's not the one who first takes damage to get the Dragonsoul buff, because oftentimes you could end up with the Dragonsoul buff on a Braum, which isn't the worst, but it's also not great. So.
Yeah, it's okay, but I think you really want to get it on Shyvana or someone who can kind of get back and start passing it to other people. Yeah, for sure.
So speaking of which, Shyvana is my vote for like the best person to take that buff initially.
Absolutely.
Shyvana's been my favorite champ so far. Feels a lot like Kindred in the sense where it's like if you get an early Shyvana, it kind of dominates the game. So she got kind of lower base stats, good AD, good attack speed as you see here, that high MR. But when she transforms, she gains 90% bonus health. Now that includes things like Brawler and Warmogs. So if you're running like a 4 Brawler Shyvana with a Warmogs, that's a lot of health.
Oh yeah.
And then once she transforms, those bolts hit hard. And by the way, they're an on hit, which means they also work with Hurricane, right?
Oh, yep, absolutely. Which we've had some discussions about, so we'll see how that ends up going. Also, her burn stacks this time, which it did not in set 1. So she's gotten some love here for sure. One of those units that I think is it can be built a little more defensively in Dragonsoul since it provides offensive stats and does really, really well. And in your brawler comp can be that sort of ranged carry that they struggle to like find or utilize and really just tear up teams from the back line. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. I think she's a great example. Like you put a GA Warmogs, have her solo front line, take the damage, get the buff, transform, go back, and then from there is just a ton of offensive output. I think that's a great way to play her.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to Shyvana. It kind of reminds me of the old Shapeshifter too, where it's just like they get that bonus health, so it feels pretty good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. All right, next up is Aurelion Sol, the old set one laser, blow up the entire enemy team. Little different this time though, right?
Yes, yes. So one of the things we talked about when we went into the mid set was Ahri and her placement and her power output such that she was kind of divorced from the mage trait. And Ahri could be run in Vanguard, Mystic, and just put in an Ahri, and she does a ton of damage. And she didn't really need that mage trait activated. So we talked a bit about like, well, okay, we're bringing in Aurelion Sol. How do we get him to sort of care about mage, just the double cast primarily, just getting to 3? And so we basically baked in this concept where he'll hit someone, and if they don't die, they get this overcharged debuff on them. And if he hits them again, he does bonus damage. So if you're hitting those tanks, those frontliners, he can chew through them with mage, but might struggle a bit without it.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's interesting to also call it that Aurelion Sol is probably not the best Dragonsoul carry, just because he's on the back line, hard to get the buff, and even if he does, it's okay. But like you said, I think he's now the premier mage carry, especially with some of the Vygar changes coming up. Like if you want to run 6 mage Asoul is gonna hurt. He's gonna blow up comps.
Yeah, we've seen some success with Dragonsoul Mage as well, in which case he's getting both benefits. Even though he's not proccing the laser beam, the Dragon Breath a whole lot, there is still that bonus SP that gets run through Mage as well. So if he suddenly has it at the end of a fight, he's the last one alive, and it's like 1v5, you'll see him delete teams. It can be pretty nutty.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I forgot the 3 Dragonsoul option. That's always a good option. True. So speaking of people that are good Dragonsoul carries, Olaf, 900 HP, 85 AD. Those are some beefy stats.
Oh, yeah.
And then, he's got that armor and MR, but just like before, when he transforms, gains a bunch of attack speed, immunity to crowd control, and built-in cleave for, 50% of his damage, which that scales with AP. So
yes.
Olaf is back.
Yeah. We basically swapped out. He had lifesteal in the past and cleave from Berserker, and so we kind of said, okay, well, let's bake in that cleave into his kit and give the lifesteal portion. He gets it from Slayer instead. So a very similar feeling overall, though, when he's run in his correct trade or whatever.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences though is he's not glacial this time.
That is true. That is very true. He's not locking down teams like he used to. He's more, I guess, in general, beefy, a little bit tankier, and he does a lot of damage when he's itemized.
A lot of damage. Yeah. Again, because especially with the cleave and the Slayer, if you can get that cleave hitting the 4 units and then Slayer kicks in and gives you all that health back, he can stay alive a long time. He's kind of the new Warwick, I'd say. Yep. I think there's going to be players that are going to get that moment where Olaf just 1v9s. Goes back to full health, and people are going to be frustrated by it. But that's what it takes to be a successful melee carry sometimes. So
true. We talked about this a lot when we first made Warwick. Like, what does it take to make a successful melee carry? Olaf definitely has that built-in CC immunity. He has some AOE. It really helps him out. I think we'll be seeing a lot of itemization of RFC and Hurricane, both with him, especially early on. But I'm interested to see how people end up itemizing him as he sort of moves between Dragonsoul and Slayer, and maybe gets run solo in some comps as well.
Cool. All right, then for the last Dragonsoul, we have Swain. Now, I will say, as I was preparing these slides, I was like, this is a long ability. But basically, it's like a set 1 reprint, but better?
Yes. Yep. He basically got built in some amount of extra armor from what didn't have it, but Dragon. He's got Shapeshifter built into him a bit, and he has an additional ability. He basically fires off for the duration of his ultimate. So there's a lot going on here. But then his lifesteal was put into the Syphoner aspect, so he did have a little bit taken away from him.
Yeah. Now he's been an interesting itemization challenge, because if you try to go full AP, you get wrecked. He just doesn't. He just dies. If you try to go full defensive, he doesn't really output quite enough. So he's in this really interesting, awkward middle ground where it's like you usually want 1 offensive item on him, and then 1 or 2 defensive items on him. So it's pretty interesting itemization challenge. But man, when he turns on, he can like hit a lot of things. So it feels
Yeah.
pretty good.
When we first started like messing around with siphoners and what would make a siphoner feel good, the concept of sustain tanking was like right at the top of the list, right? That's kind of what you want to see out of one of these. And Swain absolutely does that. When he turns on his ultimate, you'll see him like, as he's barely hanging on at like 20%, start to like shoot up and he's like constantly like dipping down and coming back up,
Yeah.
and then eventually his ult falls off and he shrinks back down. And so as with most siphoners, definitely susceptible to burst damage, which is why you want those tanky items. But when he works, he's such a treat to watch.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the more fun ones. I'll also call out, he doesn't really have any backline access. That's his other big weakness, is he's destroys front lines and melees. But the other thing I'll call out here is if you do manage to 3-star him, you'll notice his range increases to 5 hexes, and he starts hitting for 1,000 damage a second with bolts of 5,000. So I imagine he's going to be one of the more powerful 3-star 5 costs we've ever printed.
Yeah, just delete the enemy team in a couple seconds,
It's kind of what it feels like, so.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so that's it for Dragonsoul. On to the next new origin, Slayer. So Slayer is a mix of new units in Darius, Olaf, Tryndamere, and Samira, but also Zed became a Slayer, and Pyke became a Slayer, so that now it's a 3-piece and 6-piece. And the general idea is that they gain lifesteal and bonus damage. How's that work?
Yeah, so the lower the Slayer's health is, the more lifesteal they'll gain, and that kind of helps them with this sort of like rebounding back into combat. And the lower their opponent's health is, the more damage they deal. So this is like really great on units like Darius for cleaning up, or just in general, honestly, getting a little bit of extra burst damage. It also pairs really well with the healing, because if there's 2 low people fighting, your Slayer and someone else, they get a ton of lifesteal, and they deal a ton more damage. So they kind of get to spike back into combat, which is really helpful on melee on sort of sustaining out.
Yeah. So to be clear on how this works, if I have a full health Zed, he's gaining 30% lifesteal and 50% damage. 50% damage. Sorry, 30% lifesteal, 30% damage. See, even I'm confused. He starts at the baseline.
Yes.
If the Zed drops to like 1 HP,
Right.
then he has 60% lifesteal.
Correct.
And if the Zed is hitting an enemy at 1 HP, he's got 60% bonus damage, right?
Yep,
Cool.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, so let's jump into the champions, the new ones. Darius. So a couple things on Darius I wanted to touch on here. So this is a reprint, but he's a 3 cost instead of a 2 cost. And there's some changes to his abilities. You want to go over those?
Yeah, so we wanted to bring back Darius, and there was a lot of concern about Darius in that in set 3 in Galaxies. When Darius was powerful and was doing things right, he kind of destroyed a whole enemy team. Just boom, boom, boom. And that's a lot of the fun of it, but playing against that regularly, a little problematic. And at the same time, when he consistently failed because he was getting CC'd or was dying, he just felt like a useless unit. And so one of the things we really wanted to focus on, and one of the reasons we brought him up to 3 cost, was to try and sort of bring those bounds in, where he was less likely to critically fail, and his critical success cases were a lot more limited and required like very specific itemization and a team comp that can support him. So this time around, and there's a bunch of subtle changes, but the main thing is while he's in the act of actively like jumping over towards an enemy and slamming on them, he's unstoppable.
So no more QS required.
Right, exactly. And then with each successive cast he goes through, he will do less damage. So let's say I have like 1,000 base damage with him. I go and I kill someone, dealing 1,000 damage, run through all of the armor modifications. My next one will be at 800, and the next one will be at 80% of 800, which
640.
Yeah, 640. Yeah, yep.
Bam.
So and that'll continue onwards until he fails, in which case it'll reset back when he does an initial cast again.
Yeah. And keep in mind he's also a Slayer, so what can actually happen is even though it's supposed to go down, the damage can look like it's going up because you hit a lower health target than your first one. Because again, we're talking about the base damage, which is then multiplied by Slayer. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so that can be pretty interesting. The other thing I wanted to call out, because we're going to get asked this question, is that Slayer says lifesteal only.
Right.
Darius doesn't really care about lifesteal.
Correct.
Do we consider that a problem, or why are we okay with that?
Darius gains a lot of inherent power from his resets, which half of the Slayer output of dealing more damage to targets who are lower really benefits from. And so, with that much power given to Darius and his reset potential, him not benefiting as much from the lifesteal. I mean, he still gets a little bit of sustain from it, but him not benefiting nearly as much as someone like Tryndamere, who we'll talk about next, wasn't nearly like as much of a problem. And the reality is that Hextech was already one of the most powerful items on Darius. And if we gave him that inherent lifesteal instead of forcing him to use a slot on it, we'd have to really bring down his power a whole lot more to a point where he probably wouldn't be nearly as satisfying. And we really wanted to keep those highs. So
Yep, I agree with that. Yeah, like you said, forcing the slot to be almost Hextech, Gunblade, or Hodge really helps us keep his power in check. So
yeah,
cool. So yeah, speaking of which, Tryndamere, new champion, Warlord. So Warlord finally gets their 4-cost chosen. Sorry, Xin Zhao. Tryndamere is just going to be a little bit better. Slayer also, and Duelist. So 3 traits, very powerful. As you see here from the stats, very high base AD. Not that tanky, but his ability is spins towards the most enemies in a line, dealing 100% of his AD in his path, so not that big. It's a decent-sized chunk. But then his next 3 autos do an additional 75, 100%, 200% damage. So basically, his next 3 autos chunk. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Early on in testing, we had him have infinite range. I think now it's like his attack range plus 3 hexes or something. But he would just basically beeline to the back line, like one shot 2 characters, and then beeline out. And it was just... It was super intense, but he hits really hard. So it'll be interesting to see. He's one of the few characters that just like passively through his traits gets to benefit from almost every aspect of our damage amp system. So he gets to run through spell power. He gets to run through the damage amp from Slayer. And if you just slap on an IE on him, he gets to run through the crit. So he just hits like a truck. Susceptible to CC, burst, all that kind of stuff, but you'll see some big old numbers, kind of almost like a melee Draven from him when itemized well.
Yeah, the funny thing I've seen with him is like you forget that those 3 autos are generating mana, and so oftentimes what ends up happening is those 3 autos with Slayer kicked in will get him back to full health. He'll take enough damage to get enough mana to ult again, and he's almost in this like permanent state of ulting, which is really scary and definitely feels like Summoner's Rift Tryndamere. So
absolutely, yeah, he's spinning to win. He's all over the battlefield. He's really fun to watch too. So
yeah,
fun 4-cost carry.
Yeah, except unless you're playing sharpshooters, then he's a little less fun.
yeah. I think the range pullbacks have made him a little bit better about getting right to that back line, but he can definitely devastate some poorly positioned enemy units for sure.
I think he's one we'll have to keep the tuning pretty careful on PBE, so it'll be interesting to see. All right, is that all the new Slayers? Oh, we got the other 2 were like Dragonsoul and Samira, which we'll talk about later. Aha. Okay, cool. Executioner. So Kindred, Xayah, and Kayle are back, and this certainly looks a lot like Valkyrie, but it's not Valkyrie.
Yes, correct. So Valkyrie was technically an origin, and these are a class, so we wanted to make sure that they kind of separated out the names, and this is a little more reusable as a class, but functionally very, very similar, 2, 3, 4 piece, so you feel good about sort of like moving up the sort of chain of them. If you get it chosen, you can skip a tier or whatever. Very, very flexible in that regard, but their outputs are all sort of like all over the place in terms of burst damage, sort of mixed damage, and then your classic Kayle damage, which is just destroying a team with magic. So
I will say I like this design personally a lot, just because the 4-piece is 99%, not 100%. Yeah, it's just a little touch where it's like, if you're full health, you don't get crit, but anything else, you're gonna die.
Absolutely. So that kindred shot on the squishy unit in the back line doesn't technically get a crit even at 4, but any amount of passive damage coming in, and they're dead, they're gone.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So Kayle is Galaxy's Kayle, one of the most popular champions from Galaxy's 3.0. But there's some changes here because she's not a Blade Master, she's Divine.
Right.
So it seems like she's not going to be attacking nearly as much, it seems like her total DPS output goes down a bit because of that fact, but she can do true damage.
Yeah, exactly, right. The extra survivability from Divine, coupled with the potential to put out true damage, makes her not need the attack speed nearly as much. But we did also bump up her base attack speed when we went into sort of rebalance her and tweak her to hit this. I think she was like 0.7 in Galaxies, maybe 0.75, somewhere around there. And I think now she's 0.85 or 0.9.
She's 0.9 now.
So. Yeah, so still attacks very quick, still great with Rage Blade and all those attack speed items, just not quite Blade Master attack speed. Yeah.
Now the funny thing is, a lot of people when they talk, a lot of the people that don't like the Chosen system will oftentimes be like, "Oh, could you imagine if there was just a Chosen Kayle that you could just get and you just win the game?" And it's interesting because now here we have Chosen Kayle. The thing I'll call out is it seems like from our playtests, she hasn't been nearly as dominant.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think she needs some pretty proper itemization, some protection. She's obviously very, very powerful. As with most forecasts, if you run into a Chosen early, you kind of can pick them up and play around them if you need to. But the reality is that both Divine and Executioner, as just sort of like two-piece breakpoints, aren't actually that strong. So where she's positioned in the web doesn't give her like necessarily the same sort of oomph that like maybe a Jhin or something would have, where it's like, oh, this is like a really big increase in damage for the entire duration of the fight. It's like, no, this is kind of it's either time gated or a little more like based on the flow of combat than a lot of other carries would be.
Yeah. Yeah, it also just seems like this set in general, there's a lot more backline access, whether it be like sharpshooters, Jarvans, Tryndamirs, Pikes, things like that. So it ends up, you often have to, like you said, really protect this Kayle, really make sure she can survive. If you can do that, she's a powerhouse. But I don't think it's quite the auto win that it used to be in Galaxies.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
So, okay, now speaking of which, we have Xayah, which is a very interesting, different carry. I don't think a lot of people are expecting. Chloe did some really cool work here.
Yeah.
So Xayah is Elderwood, Executioner, Keeper, 3 traits, which everyone's definitely afraid of her getting Keeper and Elderwood, but we'll talk about that later. Decent attack speed, low armor, low MR, kind of a high-cost spell. But the way the spell works, can you explain this?
Yeah, so when Xayah starts to cast, she'll leap into the air and basically pull off the SR visuals where she's surrounded by feathers. She becomes invulnerable and untargetable for the duration. So units who are attacking her will go, oh, okay, she's untargetable. I'm going to go do something else and not just stand there for a second and a half or a second while this goes through. She'll then shoot out in a cone in front of her a bunch of feathers. And everyone can only be hit by 1 feather, so it's basically everyone inside the cone takes a percentage of her AD, so a lot of physical damage output in a burst. Then, after a brief delay, she'll pull all of the feathers back, dealing magic damage, but units can be hit by multiple feathers on the return. So in this particular case, when she pulls back, units who are very close to her take a lot of burst damage, which kind of makes you want to frontline her, hence the Keeper output. But she's still a squishy carry, so you kind of want to put her a little bit further back. So there's a lot of positioning puzzle that goes into like how you itemize her, where you put her, who she's next to, all this kind of stuff. But it's a mixed damage output, both flat and burst.
To give people an idea, because this is where I think one of the more interesting carries, if you put her in the back corner, how far does her ult reach?
Basically, her attack range, and I think a tiny bit more.
So basically, her attack range is 4 hexes? Or 3?
Yeah. No, she's 3 right now. So I think it'll hit the 4th hex.
So basically, if she's in the back, she can only hit the enemy front row?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the thing with Xayah. You can't position her in the back corner like you would basically every other carry. You end up wanting to almost put her in, like, the second row. Or, like, remember the old Vel'Koz spot in Galaxies where people would put him in, like, the second row on the right side?
Yep.
Like, that's almost the Xayah spot. So...
Yep, absolutely. But same problem with Vel'Koz is you've got a unit who is fairly fragile, outside of Elderwood's eventual armor and defenses and Keeper's upfront shield. It's still a squishy carry, and you can take a lot of damage just from positioning her a little too close. So I'm interested to see how players will try to deal with that.
Yeah. So that's why I think Xayah ends up being one of the more interesting challenges here. Is not just throw her in the backline corner, give her offensive items, and wins. This is like, you really got to think about where to put her, because she does a lot of damage if you can nail it, but you got to be in just the right spot.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that players will really enjoy watching, both like early on in the set and honestly throughout the entire duration, is it is crazy to me, especially because she's a later game unit, so it'll happen more likely. How often she will like clutch dodge certain things. So like a Nidalee Spear will be coming at her, and she'll just happen to get the right amount of mana to jump up in the air over it, and it completely whiffs. Or like Cho'Gath will be on the ground rumbling. She'll jump up into the air, dodge it, do damage, come down, and keep attacking.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of spectacle there, a lot of power too.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be one that people are gonna be frustrated by, but at the same time, it's one of those like it's fun when it happens to you, and it's a little less fun when it doesn't. But I
Yeah,
think it's healthy to have that. So
yeah, for sure. And it's not like she's a spam caster. She'll probably get like 1, 2, maybe 3 if you like really go like the mana defensive route, like
yeah,
lifesteal casts per combat.
yeah,
But when you watch it happen, you got to go, wow, that's high ELO Zaya right there. That was amazing.
yeah, perfect. All right, next up, Syphoner. So Syphoner is basically it's kind of like a Celestial in a way, where everyone gets the healing for damage. Now this is Omnivamp, so it's both life steal and spell steal, right?
Yep.
But unlike Celestial, it is much much more powerful for the Siphoners themselves. So
Correct.
because
Yeah.
like Celestial was like 15-20% at times for like that two piece you'd throw in.
Yep.
This is only 10, so it's a very little amount. But the Siphoners themselves, very high amounts.
Yeah, so a lot of these units do a really good job of keeping themselves alive and staying in a fight while still providing some moderate amount of help to the rest of their team. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And I think this is another one that benefits from the chosen system because like running all four of these is a little hard.
Yeah.
But if you can get a chosen Siphoner, I think that's been one of the most popular ones in our playtest where it's like
Oh yeah.
chosen Siphoner, must run Siphoner.
I think almost every playtest or every day, because we do 2 playtests a day, someone has gone Siphoner Nasus chosen. I think it's just like one of those things that you see, you pick it up and you go, yes, this is my front line. He's sustain tanking. I'm putting all these items on him because he carries so hard as a chosen until sort of the mid game where he starts to fall off and that single target doesn't really work out as well.
Well,
But he's a beast.
So speaking of which, let's jump to Nasus here.
Oh yeah, of course, sure.
So yeah, Nasus is a divine Siphoner. Not a lot of built-in defenses here. He's only got 40 armor, 40 MR, and he can't get more. He's not a Vanguard. But this ability is gross.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Single target, very heavy dot, does a lot of damage over 5 seconds, and slows the movement speed and attack speed of the unit for the duration. So
Yeah, now we've seen this. It kind of reminded us a bit of like Cassiopeia from Galaxies,
yep.
where it's just like it's a big dot. But yeah, this like basically says, "Hey, you're gonna die soon." Also reminds me a bit of Teemo on live right now, but it's a
Yep.
very powerful dot. And then, like you said, because he's Siphoner, he's gaining all that health back. So you put a little bit of AP on Nasus, and whew.
Yeah, and since he targets the person with the highest percent health, he's often getting the full duration of that, which means that as he's sort of tanking the front line and jittering mana through taking damage, he's hitting multiple units in the back line and slowly draining them down, getting your team ready to finish them off.
Yeah, so he's a fun one. Though oftentimes I think we've made the mistake of chasing the 3-star Nasus Dream, and like you said, that falls off really hard.
Yeah, it's a bit rough. I think if you naturally run into him, it's great. Totally go for it. If he's chosen, I think he can still do really well. But if you're just kind of running him in either Divine or Siphoner early, sticking to 2-star is probably the right way to go about it.
Nice. All right, next up, Vladimir, one of our new cultists. 750 HP, kind of a low attack speed, but he's a Siphoner.
Yep.
Low armor, low MR, single target drain, kind of like he was in Rise of the Elements.
Yep.
But with the new twist of after he casts his spell, he heals nearby allies for a percent of the damage done.
Yep, absolutely. So run outside of his Siphoner trait, so inside Cultist. He's really great at sort of healing up allies nearby. It's a pretty big radius too. It's a 2x radius, so he's hitting front line, he's hitting the mid line, he's hitting a little bit of the back line if you position well, and just a great all-around support. But put into Siphoner, like even just a 2-piece early, he can be run as that sort of frontline unit, sustain tank. You can carry AP items really, really well. So we haven't seen enough of him in playtests, so I'm interested to see how powerful he is on PBE. I think it's one of those champions that if he's not itemized, he's okay. Maybe you toss him out a little bit later, but if he is itemized, might be really powerful. We'll see.
Yeah, I know we've been kind of afraid of how much healing he might do, fully itemized.
Yeah. The death cap,
Yeah.
yeah, all that.
I think especially when you call out the fact that because it's percent of damage dealt, so you can use Jeweled Gauntlet to make the healing be bigger, which is pretty rare. The other thing I'll call out is that cultists are, you're going to kind of see it with Sivir as well when we talk about that, is cultists are kind of becoming more this like death ball of enhancement, where it's like
Yep.
Sivir's going to buff their attack speed, Vladimir's going to keep them alive, you've got the
Mhm.
keepers in there to keep yourself shielded, and like it's a death ball of insanity, and so I think
Yeah.
that'll be kind of cool to see as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's one of those things where uh, in the past, Cultist has had like a lack of support for Galio himself, and have often been like, let's survive for a while, and then Galio drops down, and he gets to do a lot of
Yep.
damage on this crazy stuff, and maybe a Jin gets to carry you for a while. But now with both Vladimir and Sivir coming in, we'll actually see that Galio getting a little bit of healing,
Yep.
the extra attack speed, all that kind of stuff. So he'll be doing a lot of damage and feel a little more carry-ish at times.
Yep. All right, Morgana we'll talk about a little later. Swain we already talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about Fabled. Fabled is probably the shortest trait that means a whole lot more. So, and I think we have to talk about it at some point that like there was some stuff that leaked out here,
Yeah.
but which sucks. And someday we'll talk about that. But I think Fabled was one of the ones that people would look at the leak and be like, "What the fuck does that mean?"
Yep, absolutely. It just means I need to write all my tooltips more cryptically from now on to avoid leaks until we get to PBE. So.
Perfect. All right, so what does Fabled do?
So Fabled is a three-piece, and when it is active, the Fabled units gain a bonus to their ability. And it's different for each individual unit, so while Nautilus may become tankier, Cho'Gath becomes even like more of a support
All
unit.
right. So let's see what they do here. So Nautilus is a Fabled Vanguard. So Vanguard, decent armor, kind of low MR. His ability is a long single target stun. This is a reprint of Galaxies? Nautilus?
Yes, Galaxies. Yep.
Yeah, Galaxy's Nautilus, so it's that single target stun. Does the damage has been amped though, so it actually does a decent chunk of damage.
Yep.
But if you have Fabled active, what does it do?
So he'll gain a shield on himself that reduces incoming damage by right now 75% for 5 seconds. And this just makes him such a premier frontliner in terms of not taking any damage from any source except true. He's super tanky.
Now, the crazy thing to talk about here too is that's with the mana system in check. So like as he takes a bunch of damage that's then getting reduced, he'll cast his spell again very quickly.
Yes.
And so like you said, he can be one of the tankiest units in the game through Fabled.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He kind of chain casts and is able to both lock down whoever his target is while keeping up this shield the entire time. It's very powerful.
Yeah. Next up is Nico. Now, I think a lot of people were expecting 3-cost Nico to be a Galaxy's reprint, but she's not. She's more of a Rise of the Elements reprint.
Yeah. So similar to Darius, we moved her from 2 cost to 3 cost and sort of massaged the effect a little bit. In this case, it's very similar, except for the Fable bonus, which causes the third explosion to deal a bunch of bonus damage, a triple, I think.
Yep, it's triple right now. So
Yeah.
So what's kind of cool here is that again, Mystics are getting a damage dealer, and that damage is really high. By the way, when it's Fabled, this is like close to Ari levels of power.
Yeah.
We're kind of expecting to see, like, if you get a chosen Fabled Nautilus, maybe you run a 4 Vanguard, 4 Mystic Nico carry comp,
Yep.
and that could actually do some cool stuff. So we're hoping this will actually bring back some of that Vanguard Mystic defensive but offensive kind of power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And then, of course, we can't forget the last Fabled, and probably the craziest, because you're out of your mind for making this.
Yeah.
Cho'Gath, and I'm just going to let the GIF play here. Boom!
So good.
Hits the whole board. Why don't you talk about Cho'Gath?
Yeah, so okay, I'm going to pedal way back a little bit to set 4. Enlighten's original pitch was actually this Fabled bonus system. And one of the things we talked about was it's really hard to like think about like 6 different units and what their upgrades are and how they all affect things differently. And so we kind of shelved this. So for set 4.5, I wanted to bring it back and try it again. And one of the new skin lines we had coming out involved Cho'Gath. And I was like, ooh, this is a great opportunity to try this. What's the coolest, biggest thing you could do with Cho'Gath? especially when we talked about this idea of like myth or fable, like bringing back what they did in the past but making it powerful. And set one Cho'Gath basically felt like he hit the whole board, like launch Cho'Gath.
Yeah.
And so my thoughts were, what if we just let him hit the whole board? And the original version we did in playtest was just, a 5 times bigger circle, didn't look nearly as good as this. But the initial feedback was like, what just happened? Like, this isn't okay. This is so powerful. It's disgusting. And we did have to pull it back a little bit, so he's not so good with Morellos, so he doesn't deal damage with the outside of the circle bit. But it's still such a powerful visual and does so much work for your team. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, this turned out really good. And I think you said, the fact that it used to, Morellos was kind of dominating, but now that that's not an issue, it actually feels pretty good.
Yeah.
So kind of excited to see how people play this out. But I definitely think we're going to be like, you thought this was okay? Big full screen CC. It's a lot of CC.
It is.
There.
But it's not a ton of damage, to be fair. And it's not like you can run him and Sejuani in like a similar comp and be expecting to also deal like good damage and be well-rounded. And so I think that while you hear AoE 2-second knockup, you're like, oh, that's really powerful. It's not as crazy as you might think, especially with the tax of running,
You have to get Fabled in. That's the thing.
Exactly.
The fact that you have to get Fabled in, it's pretty hard to run without a Chosen, to be honest, because you got to run all 3. But if you can get a Chosen, I think it becomes a lot more viable.
Yeah, I think this is going to be similar to Moonlight, one of those traits that you really, really want a Chosen if you're going to be leaning heavily into it, unless you get really lucky with some early pickups and 2 stars and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Now, all that being said, is even at the end of the day, he's still a brawler with 1,000 HP, with a big AoE knockup. So even if you're not running Fabled, it's not like he's not still Cho'Gath. But
yeah, still great.
Yeah, but yeah, this effect, pretty sweet.
Yeah.
All right, other new champions before we talk about the 5 costs. Rakan joining Xayah. Kind of a weird reprint, but not of Galaxy's Rakan. Is that right?
I think he's moved past the reprint sort of area at this point in time, right? Because it used to be a knockup, and it's still like CC, but it's more of like a line CC, and it's a disarm, and he has a shield. So it's like there's some similarities there, but I think there's more differences than similarities.
Yeah. I look at the shield as like built-in protector. He's got like built-in protector.
That's fair. Yeah, totally true.
But yeah, he's just extra utility, jumps around, disarms people, creates a shield on himself, but good utility to go with Elderwood.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think we have to talk about this because a lot of people are like, look, now Elderwood has built-in 2 keeper.
Yep.
And it's got 2 mages, so it's very easy to go 3 mage. And so it's a 6. Like, is the comp just becoming too like play itself?
So this is something we talked a bit about, and one of the reservations I had with adding Keeper to Xayah, she didn't originally have it, is that this comp would become too insular. It's basically, it always plays itself and it always plays out the same way, was a potential concern. However, we've had this in previous sets and it hasn't necessarily been a problem. So Star Guardian was very much built the same way every time, and who you itemized and how you positioned and stuff did change from game to game, and depending on what you kind of rolled and what you ran into power-wise, what other your opponents were playing. And so I think Elderwood will feel similar, but has more viable carry outputs at the same time between Nunu, Veigar, and Xayah. And so hopefully the items you get and how you itemize will help sort of breathe some variance in, especially with Ornn, who we'll talk about later, sort of shaking up, who gets what items and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I feel like Elderwood will become the, like, if you're trying to teach a new person how to play the set, you should teach them to play Elderwood. Like, it's going to be the beginner's trait. And you'll see later that we've adjusted the numbers, so it's not quite as the powerhouse you might think it's going to be. Yeah. But it is definitely going to be sort of a very easy to play comp, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we talked about right before break was like, man, this version of Elderwood would have been so good to put out at the launch of the set when you could just easily direct like new players to it. For a mid set, it's still really nice to have something to lean on like that. If you're not like super heavily engaged with the game, or honestly, even if you are and you just don't want to get like completely lost with all the new content. But I like stuff like this existing in the set. If there's like 1 or 2 comps that are a little more like straightforward, I think it's very valuable.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Cool. And then we have Sivir, Cultist Sharpshooter. She's not quite the carry Jhin used to be. Because instead of just being tons and tons of front-loaded damage, she rallies her allies, granting them a bunch of attack speed. Now this hits the whole board as it goes to
Yeah.
PBE, so everyone gets the attack speed.
Yep.
And she herself gets a massive chunk of AD for the duration.
Yes, yes. This is one of our first attempts at a support carry, I guess you could call it, which is a bit weird, and I think people have already started to give some feedback on that, just because, like, if you look at the damage meters for Sivir, she's typically doing okay, even if you itemize her really well, but there's a lot of hidden power on providing the rest of your team, including your Galio, with bonus damage, right? Your other sharpshooters you're running, that doesn't really get caught in that damage meter. So I think that if players can sort of internalize that, they'll realize just how powerful she really is, even if she's not as flashy as Jhin.
Yeah.
Especially with his overkill damage, right? Because, my Jhin totally did 30,000 damage. 80% of it was overkill, but big numbers.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Exactly. Cool. The other thing to call out, by the way, is this makes cultists a little easier to activate earlier. So I think you'll see a lot more 6 cultists at like level 5, level 6 than you were seeing before, where you had to like high roll a Jhin or an Aatrox. So
Yep, between effectively Evelyn, the 3 cost moving down to 2 in Vladimir, and Jhin moving down to 3 cost, you're shifting the whole structure down a little bit. Likewise, Warlord shifting up will play differently. So.
Yep, cool. All right, let's talk 5 costs. Samira, 200 years of power right here. 900 HP, 80 AD, 0.9 attack speed, so she's a lot of damage. 30 armor, 30 MR, kind of fragile.
Yep, true.
Daredevil, which we'll talk about in a second. Sharpshooter Slayer, so she can get a lot of health and do a lot of damage with those traits.
Yep.
Her ability is kind of insane, but let's talk about Daredevil first. So
Sure.
How's Daredevil work?
Okay, so Daredevil is kind of like the boss, or a lot of our other 5-cost traits, where it's an additional rule set that kind of frames what this unit is supposed to be doing in the set, and trying to make sure that they adhere to like their SR fantasy in a lot of ways. Every other attack, Samira will dash and fire 2 shots and gain 20% of her maximum health in shield. And this is sort of to make her both a little bit better when she's not ulting and have a little bit of extra survivability, but not too much. But every time this triggers, she'll also gain style. Samira actually doesn't have any mana, right? She is divorced from the mana system, similar to Jhin, where we still use the mana bar to showcase how close you are, but mana items don't do anything. Shojin's doesn't do anything. So once she fills that style bar, then she gets to cast her spell. And the higher her star level is, which we might massage a bit, the quicker she can get to that ultimate ability.
Yeah. Now, her ability is really powerful because it's firing, 24 shots, up to 24 shots.
Yes.
Keep in mind, each shot can bounce from Sharpshooter.
Yep.
And proc Slayer. And during the ult, she is unstoppable and gains 100% dodge. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So she's hard to deal with when she ults. She can be locked down before, and she does a lot of AoE damage with 2 offensive traits, and scales really well because it's all attacks with a lot of the physical damage items. So she's kind of like bringing Kaisa back, or someone who's like more of that like physical damage carry into TFT.
Yeah. She kind of reminds me of a more extreme Katarina, though, from what I've seen in our playtests, where it's like, if you try to itemize her all offensive, what it often ends up happening is she gets CC'd, she dies, she falls over, she does nothing. If you try to itemize her all defensive, like GA, she ults, but then it doesn't quite do as much as you need it to. So again, we end up with this really interesting itemization puzzle of like, how do you give her just enough defensive stuff so that ult procs, but just enough offensive stuff so when it does proc, it hurts like hell.
Yeah, she's one of the 5 costs that I think best pairs with a lot of the spat items. So like Warlord Spatula, Samira, like bonus HP, bonus SP for offense, like that mixed item, amazing on her. Elderwood, actually keeping her alive, amazing on her. So she's definitely very stat hungry in general, both offensive and defensive.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see people lose to this ult and be like, what the hell? And then we're going to see other people go, I can never get her to cast, she's useless. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yep, I think we had a little bit of concerns about like bringing back a unit like Gangplank, who is just all focused on the damage output for a 5 cost. But her detachment from the mana system allows us to sort of push power into different spaces and like feel a little bit better about like, you can't just like frontline a Gangplank with, like 1 defensive item and have him ult every time, or, GA, whatever, anything like that. Yeah,
because that's a big one, right? If you GA frontline Samira, she dies and then is still at C or B.
Yeah, exactly.
She hasn't hit S, and so yeah, I think that's going to be a much healthier version for sure.
Yes, hopefully. Yep.
Okay, let's talk about the next champion, which I got to give credit to you because I think when everyone was thinking Ornn and Blacksmith, there's something in this space, but I think you kind of cranked it to 11 more than everyone was expecting. So...
Yeah. I wanted to do big new items in TFT for a while. I think if you'll remember back to when I first joined the team during set 2, one of the things we talked about was like, hey, players get these full items on occasion and they don't feel great, right?
Yep.
Like it's kind of like
pitch,
one. Yeah. So I did an artifact pitch and I was like, hey, what if we do like these weird one-off items that are a little more maybe either Kiss Curse or like you couldn't normally make, and well, it didn't actually pan out. We kind of struggled to find a good place for them. When it came to Ornn and bringing him back, I was like, we got to do this again. We need totally new items that feel like they definitely like fit right into TFT on a ton of units. But if you were allowed to make them every time, they would need to be like too weak to like really feel good. Or
all right. So before we get to the items, we got an Elderwood Vanguard Blacksmith, Elderwood Vanguard, so gives Vanguard some new stuff. Generally, I would say feels like about a 4 cost in power. Feels kind of like a Sejuani.
Sure.
His spell is his ultimate from Summoner's Rift. Does that sound about right?
Yep, absolutely.
So he summons the Ram. The Ram does a little bit of damage and applies the chill effect.
Yep.
But then if the Ram hits Ornn and he's not CC'd, he knocks it back, doing the stun. Oh, even if he's CC'd?
Okay. Right now, even if he's CC'd. The bigger miss criteria for him, because it felt really weird to watch the Ram run through and you couldn't really tell if he was CC'd or not sometimes.
Gotcha.
But if he moves out of the way or is displaced, then the Ram just kind of runs off the screen because he's not there to headbutt it. So that's his bail condition. Yeah.
So decent amount of CC, not a ton of damage, not a ton of anything else, and very high mana cost. So he's usually only casting this once per fight.
Yep.
But Blacksmith, now if I remember correctly, the way it works is if you have a 1-star Ornn, it's every 4 turns.
Just to clarify, Ornn needs to have participated in a combat in order for you to, at the start of the next planning phase, earn progress. So, but yes.
Very good. 2-star Ornn, it's every 3 combats he participates in.
Yep.
And 3-star Ornn is every combat because good luck.
Yes.
Now, if you do that, he creates an artifact. So if we go to the next slide, here are 4 examples of the 10 artifacts. And you're kind of blocking Mount Amuse and Infinity Force. Yeah, you can't move. But why don't you go over some of these here? I think there's some good ones here.
Sure. So there are 10 items total, and we've got 4 of them here. The Collector is a sort of an executioner item that you can put on anyone who sort of finishes people off. Whenever they damage a unit who is below 10% health, they instantly kill them, similar to like old Vagar, where he would just instant kill. And then these executions always generate a gold. So a little bit of extra economy coming in whenever they get a kill. Little space pirate vibe mixed with Predator almost.
Yep.
Super cool. Rocket propelled fist. Blitzcrank hook just on an item, which is hilarious to watch. You'll have like your support in the back line, like a Janna, just shoot out a fist, grab a unit, and pull it towards her, and then everyone will taunt. Exact same as Blitzcrank in previous sets.
Yep.
Manazane, this one, very powerful. We've seen a lot of use of this on Zillion, in particular. But after they cast their spell for the first time in a combat, they'll restore 100 mana right now, which this might change over 4 seconds. So it kind of like ticks in pretty rapidly. And this works for both big casters, like your sets, your Zillions, who need a lot of mana to get there, but also for your low mana cost casters. So an example of this would be like Kindred. Kindred only needs like, 25, 30 mana? It's 35?
I think it's 35, yeah.
35 mana to cast. But during that entire time, even while she's like locked out from casting a spell, she's still generating the mana. So if you pop a Manazane on her, she will ult like every second 4 times in a row. It's very, very powerful. Yeah.
Yep. And
then
then
finally,
we have Infinity Force.
Yes.
That's the one I got in.
Yes.
This is because, Trinity Force with 3, you get 33 AD, 33 attack speed, 33 AP, 33 mana, 33 armor, 33 MR, 333 health, and 33 crit.
The only thing we pulled from this was 33% dodge because that was very powerful.
Yeah.
You would put on a frontliner and they would just not die to physical damage
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so again, these are 4 of the 10. There are 6 others, but you don't get to pick, right? So like,
Correct.
Ornn just makes an item and that's it.
Yep.
And where I think this is interesting, because I think a lot of people's reaction is going to be, these items are insane. You get Ornn, you win the game. But what kind of keeps us in check here is that it takes an item slot, and you can only have one. So what often happens is you reach late game, your carry already has 3 items.
Yep.
So you don't usually have room for the artifact. So all of a sudden you're left with some really interesting like decisions, or do you leave an artifact slot, things like that. And so overall it's been pretty healthy for the game. And the fact that you have to run Ornn, which sometimes can be a curse. Like, he's not as powerful as other 5 costs. He's not...
Very true.
To be honest, I think he's worse than Giovanni, power-wise.
Yeah, especially at 1 star. He struggles a lot to like stay alive and really accomplish anything early on, so it's really all in on his artifact, especially if you're running him like late game without any items or any star levels. Yeah.
Now, that being said, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We've definitely had a playtest where somebody got an early 4-1, level 7, Ornn with 2 Nikos, Niko'd it, and it was like, bye, see you at the other end. So there's some of that for sure.
Yeah, between Carousel and Fortune, I think there will be some highlight moments where Ornn really just sort of like snowballs you into the late game, but you still need to use these items properly, and not every item is going to be perfect in every comp, but every item you get should be good on someone in your comp somehow. So.
Yeah. I will say personally, I think these are like 4 of the best.
Sure, yeah.
There's definitely some that like I'm not personally a fan of. So it's like sometimes you do feel like you get the low roll too, where it's like you didn't get the artifact you wanted. But it'll be interesting to see, and I'll be curious to see people's opinions on all these artifacts. So
yeah, for sure, and we can massage some of them as well. If they go live and it turns out that no one likes, one of them, it's like, okay, well maybe we do a rework of it just like we would a champion or whatever,
Yep.
So yeah.
Exactly. Cool. All right, so that I think is it for new champions, but there's still one surprise that didn't make it into the leak. Thank God. Now let's talk about Lucky Lanterns.
Yes.
So Lucky Lanterns, and again, I have to give credit to the whole team because we were playtesting, and again, we're making mid-set expansions. This is only our second one. And with Galaxies, we kind of had other Galaxies. Like, other Galaxies kept coming, so it felt like there was a lot of content. As we were playtesting this, it definitely felt like new champions, but it still didn't really feel like an expansion. It didn't feel like not enough had changed.
Yeah.
So the team came together kind of at the last minute and put this together, and a lot of effort, right before break, and we got this in, so it feels pretty good. But so let me explain what a Lucky Lantern is. A Lucky Lantern will either appear on stage 2-1, 3-1, 4-1, or not at all. Every player gets their Lucky Lantern at the same time, so if this game everyone gets it at 3-1, everyone gets it at 3-1. Every player gets the exact same thing from their Lucky Lantern, so there's no like, oh, they got 20 gold and I got... That's not fair. No, everyone gets the exact same thing. It'll kind of remind you of a Galactic Armory in that regard. And the later the Lucky Lantern comes, the more stuff inside. So let's say, for example, if 20 gold were a possibility, you aren't getting 20 gold at 2-1.
Oh, yeah.
But you might get 20 gold at 4-1. So Lucky Lanterns can contain gold, item components, very rarely Nico's spatulas and Force of Natures, very rarely.
Yeah.
But here's the real kicker. There's a new thing in them called Consumables. We've created 4 new Consumables that can appear from Lucky Lanterns.
Yeah.
What the hell is a consumable? Well, Giovanni, why don't you talk about the first one?
Sure. So consumables, we have one in the game right now, which is Nico's, and we wanted to expand on them a bit. First up is Loaded Die. Loaded Die will basically, if you drop it on a unit on the battlefield, or actually on your bench as well, it'll populate your shop with rolls of the same origin or traits as that unit that are legal to you. So, for example, if you have, in this example, we have Fabled Vanguard, all items that would be rerolled in a shop for you are either going to be a Vanguard or a Fabled, but still following your odds. So, for example, if you have a 35% chance to roll 1 costs, and let's say Garen was the only 1 cost Vanguard Fabled of either, you would only see if you rolled any 1 costs those Garens.
Yeah.
And the same is true for everything else.
Yeah, just like in this example, you can see there, the 5 cost says 0%. So it's not like they're going to see an Ornn in the shop from using this.
Right. Yeah.
So part of the skill is like, when do you use it? What level do you use it? What champion do you use it on to try to maximize your odds? Now, and because we always get this question, what happens if I use it on a champion that there are none of or whatever? The most common one is Yone. Let's talk about Yone, because he's the craziest example. Because Yone is only an Adept Exile. There's only 3 Adepts, and there's only 1 Exile. So what's going to happen? Well, you're going to get a shop full of probably Yasuos, Aurelias, and Shens. And maybe some Yones if you're lucky. Because, again, it follows the normal drop odds. Now, if, hypothetically, all 10 Yones were gone and you used it, it just means you're going to see a bunch of Yasuos and Shens, you know. And the odds of all of them being drained are so low, but if that happens, then it will just pull a random champion. So, but again, like, I don't think that's actually possible unless you're, like, trying to break the game kind of possible.
Yeah, that means you're playing 1v0 on the PBE. So
yeah. Now this consumable has kind of been the most fun, I think, in our playtest. Players have really enjoyed this one. It creates these really cool moments where it's like, okay, time to really get the things I need. For example, I remember there was one game I really needed an Azir, so I used it on a Jarvan to try to get the Azir, you know, to try to maximize those chances. Do you have any fun stories like that?
So in general, I just think it's one of those things that I've been delighted by every time I've used it. So I've used it early game for a power spike and suddenly got myself like two 2-stars, and I've been like, oh wow, I've totally spiked. And I've like used it late game, not expecting to get a 5 cost, but getting like 2 of them in my shop and being like, this changes everything. Like I gotta pivot, you know. So.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot. The one thing we do want to keep an eye on with this is like when you get these early, it is very powerful because you can kind of like force 1 costs. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. There's a possibility this like won't drop in the 2-1 Lucky Lantern if that becomes a big issue.
Sure.
But yeah, this has been a fun one. So this is one of the consumables you can get. Another one, I think this one will be less popular until people figure out how to use it, but is the Reforger. And basically what happens is you use it on a champion that has at least 1 item on it. The items pop off and completely re-roll. So if you can see here, the cloak became a tier. It just completely re-rolled to a different item. The Ginsus became a Ludens, and the Warmogs became a Quicksilver. Now, why would you do that? I don't know why you do that for full items. But where I think this is useful is if you have a leftover item that you don't want to use. This is a good way to like try to get a different one. And I also think this is good for re-rolling Ornn artifacts, because if you get an Ornn artifact you don't like, you can re-roll it.
Yep, absolutely. So it does respect the tier. And in the future, if we were to put any more tiers in, it would do the same thing there. But mostly useful for components, for sure. I think that'll be like the thing people do all the time is I really just do not need this Negatron cloak at all. I could use anything else, please. You know, re-roll it.
So like I said, that's what that's mostly for. Kind of a light touch, but still nice to have if you get one of these. Next one's a really simple one, but it does open some surprising options. It's the Magnetic Remover. Use it on a champion with at least 1 item to just unequip the items. Pretty straightforward. Where I've seen this be really useful is it allows you to slam items on a carry early. Not feel bad about the fact you slammed them. Then when you get the better items, pop them off and give them the better item instead of the whole like remake the champion.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's also something that feels great about it, and I think one of the best examples of this is probably going to be Sharpshooter. Is you can feel good about itemizing a Tristana early in the game, and putting items that are shared with like Samira on her, even if they're not the best items for her. Get a 3-star Tristana, pop them off in a late game, and move everything over to Samira, and you still get to keep that Sharpshooter fully maxed out, right? Like it's really good in that regard.
And again, I want to call out with all of these consumables, like all these cases we're describing. If they happen in a game, everyone can do it because everyone got the same consumables. So should be kind of interesting. Now, the last one's a little weird. Probably the weirdest one we did. But it's the training dummy. And so the way this one works is you just use it and it spawns a training dummy. Kind of like an Azir soldier. You can place it anywhere. It doesn't do anything. It has HP. At 2-1, it's a 1-star, and it has 700 HP. So kind of supplements Frontline. These are the kind of games where if you get a training dummy... you can probably play a little bit more safer backline comps because you don't need as much frontline. At 4-1, it becomes a 2-star training dummy, so it levels up. At 6-1, it becomes a 3-star training dummy. And if somehow you make it to 8-1, which I don't think I've ever done on a live game, but if you do, it will become a 4-star training dummy. So,
Yep. I don't think we've ever made it there, but it'll be a big beefy frontline unit with extra HP.
Yeah.
And just like as your soldiers, like you can't put them on your bench, you can't sell them. It's once it's out, it's out. So you should use it right away. I cannot think of any reason why you would not want to have your training dummy out early, unless you are trying to lost streak. You're following that fortune dream.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yep.
Cool. So that's Lucky Lanterns. So you can expect to see those in your games and see how those change how you play. So that should be pretty cool. Now let's do the kind of paperwork to wrap it all up here, which is just the other changes to talk about. So one thing we're going to talk about is that we have seen on live 5 costs are still happening a little too often for how much we'd like. We'd like to keep them powerful. We like that they're very powerful and exciting, but again, like the full 5-star comps are happening a little too much. So we're dropping the odds at level 8 by 1% and the odds at level 9 by 3%. So you're going to see a slight reduction of 5 costs there. The other thing is the opening carousel. One of them was the defensive one, 3 belts, 3 cloaks, 3 armor. So few players found that fun. We've decided to just get rid of it. So it's gone and has been replaced with a 2 sword, 2 bow, 2 rod, 2 tier, 1 glove carousel. So sweet.
Thumbs up from me on that one.
Yeah. Okay, trait changes. Assassin. What we've seen with Assassin is that it's too easy to just throw in 2, get your free spell crit, and then never go much higher. So we're lowering the power of 2 just a little bit. But we also see, like, nobody ever goes 6. So we kind of want to open up some more 6-piece Assassin bonuses. So you're going to see that get buffed. Cultists, I'm going to sort of summarize this real quick. But basically you can get it earlier. So it has to be a little less powerful early. But we still want it to be strong later, so it actually ends up stronger later. This is a 9 cultist buff. This is a 6 cultist slight nerf, and a 3 cultist very slight nerf. But as you invest in cultists, because the multiplier goes up, this actually ends up better over the long run.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, there will be a lot more of that early game cultist gameplay. So we really need to focus on this a little more than I think most people would expect just looking at the changes. So.
Yep, exactly. Duelist gets a slight bump up. I think I typoed this, by the way. I think it's supposed to say 12, 20, 40, 60, not 30.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
I think it's just a buff to 6-piece because 6-piece is harder to get now that Xinjiao went from a 3-cost to 4-cost Tryndamere. So it gets to go up in power a little bit. Elderwood gets nerfed. Kind of a undo of the last patch that buffed it. But again, as we talked about, Elderwood's a lot more of a self-fulfilling comp. It's a lot easier to play. So it kind of has to go down in power.
And I'll just note, because I think people might be moving towards Elderwood early in this set, just because of its sort of building itself. Very, very early Elderwood will struggle a bit just because they lack the damage output. They lost Hecarim in exchange for Rakan, and Rakan doesn't deal any damage. So you still have to find like some unit to slot in, whether it be like a mage like Brand or Twisted Fate, to like sort of like push you along that path. So just be aware of that if you're running like exactly the first 3 units in Elderwood. You might just like get to overtime and then lose.
Enlightened, this is one of the bigger changes. So Enlightened lost Nami and gained nothing.
Correct.
So they went from 6 units to 5, which means the only way to get 6 Enlightened is a Chosen.
Yep.
So if you do that, you now get really heavily rewarded. So the 4-piece Enlightened bonus is as powerful as the old 6. So that should open up some options there. But if you can run all 6, 200% mana gain. This is pretty strong. We've seen Talon dominate some of our playtests with this. So
yeah, Morgana's really good too as a Syphoner. Just like doesn't die while putting down a million puddles. Like it's very powerful if you can get there for sure.
Yep. So that should be fun. Keeper, we added a keeper. We literally just added a keeper. So because of that, its power has to go down pretty substantially. And again, the keepers are self-fulfilling. So what you see here is basically a keeper nerf across the board to make up for that fact. Mage got a pretty big rework here. So they lost 2 mages, right? Who'd we lose? We lost Nami and Ari.
No, well, Nami, Ari, and Lilia.
Oh, right.
Gained Brandon, Aurelion Soul. So they're down 1 unit.
Correct. We lost 3, gained 2, so we're down 1. So Mage got reworked to a 3/5/7. I think that's the first time we've done a 3/5/7.
We did 3/5 with Moonlight. But yeah, sure. 3/5/7.
3/5/7, yep. So basically 3 is still the same. 5 is actually just a little bit weaker than 6, and 7 is a little bit weaker than 9, but opens up some more interesting flex points and compositions. Like 5 mage is now all of a sudden much more interesting than 6 mage, especially with Chosen, that you can get some more supporting traits in there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's much easier to cover up the weaknesses of mage in terms of frontline and some like utility aspects with a lower barrier to entry. Well, barrier to high tier entry, whatever.
Yep. Mystic 4 and 6 were buffing up because they honestly, like, no one's really committing to 6 Mystic, and if you do, the payoff should be pretty big. So we're going to buff that up. Sharpshooter, this one's an interesting change because it looks weird, but basically we're giving them more bounces so that they can do some more interesting things, use some more items, because they lost a lot of power. Losing both Jinx and Jin kind of hurt them a bit. What we've seen in our Sharpshooter games is that they're pretty good early, and then they fall off a cliff. So we're trying to balance around that. Expect to see these numbers change on PBE, but that's a thing going on there.
They lost. I think the biggest thing for them was definitely Jinx, who could actively shut down and slow down fights for them to actually deal damage. So bringing their power up as a result, offensive power means they get to be more of the backline DPS that I think people might expect from a bunch of units with guns and spears and all that.
Okay, and finally is Spirit, which actually got a pretty big rework here. Now, it lost Ari, but gained Diana, which puts it in kind of a weird spot because it's a 1-1-2-3 or 1-2-2-3 cost-wise? 1-2-3-3. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. I was like, what?
1-2-3-3. But the issue was always that like so much of Spirit's power was in Ari because of the high mana cost and everything being tied to the mana cost. But if we put it on Diana, that'd be a lot of power early. So what we actually did is now it's just a flat attack speed the first time a Spirit unit casts, regardless of the mana.
Also ends up working out really well with both, I think, Teemo and Yuumi were mana for their Chosen. And now that doesn't detriment them in a weird way while being better sometimes. It's just like a pure upgrade. So
and then the other thing to note, I don't think it'll be on PBE the day 1 we go live, but the plan is that a Spirit Chosen will count as 2 also.
That should be in when it goes live. I think I fixed that right before break.
Sweet. So, cool. But yeah, Spirit's a really good like supplement comp to like add in now. It feels pretty good early, so should be cool to see. All right, on the champion side, speaking of Spirit, Diana. As you see here, new splash, new skin, Spirit Assassin, not Moonlight anymore. But because of that, she kind of gets compensated because she used to kind of auto upgrade with Moonlight. So she gets higher base HP, her 3-star gets higher value, and more orbs. So Diana just gets to be a little bit better to make up for that fact. Pyke, on the other hand, who gained Slayer and nothing else, had to kind of be punished. Because giving him Slayer for free, he was outputting a lot of damage, surprisingly.
Slayer does a lot more than you think it does. And putting it on an old unit, like just adding it on, showed just how powerful it could be. Because we started seeing like carry Pikes, which was just so bizarre in a world where he's like always a support unit. So he gets a bit of a mana adjustment, but the bigger thing here is the damage goes way down. So you'll see Pyke being a little less strong there. Zed is now a Ninja Slayer. We talked about this. He gets an attack speed buff to make up for the fact he can't drop aggro every 3 hits, which definitely makes him weaker. But since Shade used to be the part of his spell that said jump back, now he just jumps back by default, right? So this is the first time we're kind of baking this into a unit instead of like relying on a trait. But part of his kit, he'll jump to the back line.
Cool. Kindred. Spirit Executioner. That's it. That's the only change. Cool.
Yep.
And then Vygar. Okay, so this one's my fault. I want to talk about this one. As we talked about, Elderwood is looking really strong. Elderwood Mage especially. And in all of our playtests, Vygar has gotten to a point where it's okay that he kills people. Like, that's his job, right? Is to blow people up with high AP. He's doing it a little fast. He's deleting 4 units from a comp in like 4 seconds. Not really thrilled with that right now. So, on PBE at least, he's getting a big nerf. What's interesting here is if you itemize him the way you used to, which is blue buff, Hodge, Gunblade, he's still going to get that first free double cast for free. Like, that didn't change. So you'll still delete 2 units. But the subsequent deletes are going to take longer.
Yeah.
I think this is generally a more healthy version of Vygar. We'll see. There's also some concern it's an over nerf. We'll see. But from what I'd seen in our playtest, we only playtested this like a day or 2 before. People were still running him, and it was still working. So
yeah. I between this and Darius, there was a lot of, if I see one more Vagar with a Hex Tech, I'm nerfing him even further. So
I was pretty salty those last few playtests. Because for whatever reason, our internal meta had become Elderwood Darius all the time, and I was so sick of it. We had a few people.
So fun to watch more.
We had a few people on the team too that was like, "Oh, I got a single tier. It's a Darius game."
It's a Darius game, yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing with Space Pirates, and same thing with Fortune, where you see one, you're like, guess I'm doing it again. Sorry.
Yep. All right. On the 4 and 5 costs, so this is probably one of the bigger buffs. Aatrox gained some HP, a lot of armor, so that he could actually be a more successful tank in Cultist by himself. But the bigger thing here is a lot more damage.
Yep. One of the things we talked about, and we want to watch on PBE, and once it goes live a bit as well, is the concept of like, can Vanguards be run as a vertical? And if they're missing something, what is it? It's presumably a carry, especially in like the 4 or 5 cost range. And Aatrox is like the only unit slotted to be able to do that. So we might need to nudge him even more than just this spell damage, but affect his spell in some way, so that you can feel good about running 4/6 Vanguard. But I think that's kind of like the first steps at trying to help him out of it here.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's also a world where we have to touch Vanguard trait a little bit. That's one of the biggest things we're keeping an eye on PBE. But yeah, this is a step towards that and making Aatrox... Like, I don't think Aatrox ever ended up as exciting as we expected him to be throughout this entire live meta.
Yeah, I think the spectacle of his spell is where it should be. It's very flashy, and he gets to pull stuff.
Right.
But the damage outpoint makes him not really a carry. He's just a front line with backline access, and that kind of like doesn't feel like it has as much of a place in a world with Ahri and other units that like get to do a lot of big damage.
Yep.
So.
It's okay. So Morgana is now an Enlightened Syphoner, but the big thing here is her spell. Does it still reduce magic resist?
Yep.
Okay, so her spell still reduces magic resist. It just now, instead of healing, it doesn't do any healing. That's gone because it's part of Syphoner.
Yep.
But instead has built-in Dazzler, basically.
Yep.
So, cool. And then lastly, there's some 5-cost nerfs. Because again, we're still seeing some of the 5 costs just be a little too free win when you hit them. Azir gets his knock-up duration and slow duration lowered a little bit. Lee Sin gets his damage lowered a bit. Let's be honest, Lee Sin was never about damage anyway.
True.
And then Yone's armor and MR reduction. And I'll be honest with you, like, we're kind of looking at Yone right now as something that we might need to even rework a little harder. So I expect to see him go through some revisions on PBE, because I think he's kind of single-handedly shutting out a lot of 3-star and tanky champions and things like that. So I expect to see him get kind of a bigger rework, but we'll see.
Armor Shred and MR Shred are invisible power that does a lot, but he's also on top of that got this like tank killing insta-gift on top of it. So between the two, we probably want to focus on one of those. So.
Yeah, the percent health thing is pretty nutty. So, all right, and then item changes, just some quick things here. Gunblade gets a small nerf. Some of the champions it's really good on, it's a little too good on. Hurricane gets a small nerf as well. Same thing. I think this is for the good of the game. You don't really want to see 90% Hurricane Olafs and Trindamirs and things like that. So I think that'll be good. One other one I'd expect would be Giant Slayer. I could see Giant Slayer going down to 90%. Or 80%. I'll throw that out there. But otherwise, like I said, not a lot of focus here on the item changes. Overall, the items are in a pretty good spot in the game. I think the one people will call out is where's my Frozen Heart adjustment, because that is definitely one of the weaker items. And then Ludens and Static Shiv. Ludens, we'll see. I think it's still pretty good on like Brand. And then Shiv, like I said, Tristana. I'm not too worried about Shiv, so we'll see. So
yeah. I think items at this point in time kind of need to conform a little bit around how the set is panning out from a champion perspective.
Yeah.
Because relegating a item to like 1 or 2 units, like Luden's Nami, Luden's Brand, kind of feels kind of bad. But at the same time, like you'll see that like Hurricane didn't see a lot of love in set like 4, like not a lot of it, but in set 4.5.
Yeah, it goes on a lot of champions.
You still want to use it. So
yeah. And I think another good example here is Warmogs, right? Like people have been calling Warmogs really weak for all of set 4. And I think all of a sudden we're going to hear like, I'm so sick of Warmogs Swain, Warmogs Shyvana. So
yeah.
Cool. All right, so we did it. We reached the end. This is 4.5. It goes live on PBE January 5th at some point when it's ready. So probably in the afternoon. Don't expect it earlier. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this up, Giovanni?
No, I'm just looking forward to watching a bunch of games once it hits PBE and seeing what players will break. We'll have to nerf.
I'm excited for the game to be fresh again. It's been a long time coming. I'm so glad we're never going to do a 4-month set again like this. That'll be good. I'm excited for the daily PBE changes and things like that. That'll be fun because I can't stress it enough. It's not balanced right now. We know it's not balanced yet. We're ready for you guys to beat it up. So give us your feedback. Let us know what you think. Should be fun though. So cool. All right. Well, then on behalf of everyone on the TFT team, thank you. And we hope you're looking forward to Festival of Fates, Festival of Beasts. Can't even say the name right. Haha. Cool. So with that, take it easy.